Hello, and welcome back to Glitterature Alley. I am Tootight Lautrec, the master mistress of Glitterature Alley, and here we are once again at the bottom of the down staircase in the permanently sequestered remainders section of an unnamed local library which may or may not have two lions posing stiffly on the front steps, looking dignified and pretty to be sure, but I do sometimes wonder what makes them tick. Not so much different from the main character that we'll be looking at today's episode of Pulitzer Who. Last week, we discussed Louis Bromfield's wonderful novel, Early Autumn, which won the Pulitzer Prize for the novel in 1927. And this week, we'll scurry past the much more well-known Thornton Wilder, who won in 1928 for his novel, The Bridge of San Luis Rey, and we'll settle down with Julia Peterkin and her novel, Scarlet Sister Mary, which won the Pulitzer Prize for the novel in 1929. Now, we'll consider a few of the other novels that were published in the year prior, which would have been up at the same time that Scarlet Sister Mary was. And some of those novels include the novel Boston by Upton Sinclair, Dark Princess by W.E.B. Du Bois, two novels by Juna Barnes, Lady's Almanac and Rider, The Man Who Knew Coolidge by Sinclair Lewis, A Mirror for Witches by Esther Forbes, The Plains of Abraham by James Oliver Curwood, and Nella Larsen's first novel, Quicksand, and We Are Invincible by someone named Marjorie Latimer. And none of those won. And lastly, but not leastly, there is another novel called Victim and Victor by John Rathbone Oliver, which Dr. Richard S. Burton, who was the chair of the Pulitzer Fiction Literature Jury, recommended for the prize, but it was not chosen. The board chose instead Scarlet Sister Mary by Julia Peterkin. And there is a rumor that he resigned from the board in protest, but I did find a New York Times article in which he talked about how he was at a conference before the Pulitzers were announced, and someone asked him if he had read any good books lately, and he said that he's read a number of good books, the best of which was Victim and Victor, which was up for the Pulitzer Prize. And so he resigned not because he was protesting Scarlet Sister Mary, but because he and the Pulitzer board agreed that maybe talking about who's up for it before they announce it is not such a good idea. So he said, you don't have to nominate me for the board again. And they said, okay, we won't. So just to clear up a little bit of that. Julia Peterkin was born in 1880 and died in 1961. She was born in South Carolina, and at 17 years old, she finished a master's degree and then went to Fort Mott, South Carolina, to become a teacher. And in 1903, she married a man named William George Peterkin, who was heir to the Lang Syne Plantation, whose community of 500 black laborers who were descended from slaves now worked the land for themselves decades after the abolition of slavery. So after her marriage, Peterkin had a son who was delivered by her father-in-law, and at the same time as the delivery, the father-in-law removed her ovaries for reasons that nobody really quite knows, after which Julia Peterkin fell into a prolonged and deep depression. And during that deep depression, one of the laborers on the farm named Lavinia Berry befriended Julia and kind of nursed her back to health and brought her into this more deeply into the community of laborers, this insular black community of freed plantation workers. And it was about this community that she would write for the rest of her career. So accordingly, Scarlet Sister Mary is set in a South Carolina cotton plantation decades after the abolition of slavery. All the white people have left. Have left. It's a tight-knit, all-black Christian community, and the main character Scarlet Sister Mary is called Sister Mary because of the Christian nature of the community, where everyone is a brother or a sister in Christ. So it's that aspect of the church that she's called Sister Mary. Now, the novel was scorned and praised in equal measure. It was banned from some libraries. Some people said that it was sex exploitation. Some people said it was pornography. And then accompanying that was the discomfort that it was a book written by a book written by a white woman about a black community. But conversely, it also got praise from writers such as Alain Locke, who was the first African-American Rhodes Scholar, and he is acknowledged as the dean of the Harlem Renaissance. And he said that he saw in Peterkin's banishment of propaganda a new attitude of the literary South toward Negro life. So, like Alain Locke, and like James Baldwin, and like James Allen McPherson, who was the winner of the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction in 1978 for his story collection Elbow Room, and who was also just a very wonderful man to boot. Like these people, I too have no qualms when fiction writers creatively render characters, no matter how different they may be from the writer's own demographic. So that in itself is an interesting discussion, but it deserves its own video, and it's a discussion for which I'm really not equipped. But one example of such a conversation is one in which James Baldwin moderates a discussion between the writer William Styron, who wrote The Confessions of Nat Turner, and the actor Ossie Davis. And it gets rather tense at times, but I'm going to link it below. You can read it, or you can watch it yourselves and come to your own conclusions. I do sort of wish that it was a discussion between two writers and not a writer and an actor, because I think that would have made things just a little bit more different. The perspectives could have been a little bit different, but Ossie Davis's views are valid as well. So, while again, I have no qualms about a writer writing outside of their own experience, outside of their own demographic, it's fine as far as I'm concerned, as long as it's done well. And we'll get into that in a moment. So, Sister Mary, at the beginning of the book, is a 16-year-old girl who falls in love with and marries a man named July. And it quickly becomes apparent to the rest of the community that Mary will be having a child well before the 9 months pass after their marriage. And because of this, she is shunned from the church. She's excommunicated, and she's branded a sinner. But Mary, while she understands that the importance of being in good standing with the community and with the church is something that's desirable, she also believes that the life of the body is a beautiful thing, and she isn't repentant about it. So that's the premise and the main source of tension. Mary's desire to be a member in good standing in the church and the community versus her desire to raise a family and live the life of the body. So far, so good. If I did not know that Julia Peterkin was white, I may not have guessed it, because the people and the environment she describes in Scarlet Sister Mary are very convincingly done. But, and it's a somewhat stinky but, even though she interestingly and expertly describes the people and the environment of this community, she seems to have skipped over the fact that in fiction, you need more than people and environment. You need a compelling story. And this is what I feel is lacking in Scarlet Sister Mary. I never felt that I got a deep understanding of Mary's motivations or vulnerabilities, and as a result, she feels to me like a bit of a stereotype of a promiscuous woman in an exotic setting. The first half of the novel is concerned with Mary's marriage to July, the beautiful but philandering July, who finally leaves Mary and their son and disappears into the city with another woman. So Mary procures a love charm in the hopes that when July comes back, she'll be able to win him back from this woman. But days pass, weeks pass, months pass, and it appears July is never coming back. So then a man named June crosses Mary's path, and he works his way into her good graces, one might say. And then at page 182, we get this, the beginning of a new chapter. The next Christmas day found Mary with Seraphine, a tiny baby girl, in her arms. And Seraphine, we learn, her blood was warm with new life. Actually, Mary's blood was warm with new life. And Sin and Seraphine had agreed with her, we find out. And then, not 5 pages on from that, we get another chapter which announces that 15 years have passed, and Mary has 6 or 7 more children with as many different men, cementing her scarlet status in the community. She's shunned from the church, but she still seems to live in the community in relative happiness. And for me, the most interesting part of this story is not even told. It's skipped over completely. What happened, I wonder? What were Mary's struggles? Her struggles with herself, her struggles with religion, her struggles with her physical desires, her struggles possibly with the men with whom she engendered these children, and her struggles with the community in which she still seems to live okay in, relative happiness. They haven't kicked her out and refused to feed her or anything like that, but I just wondered what's going on. If being branded scarlet is such a bad thing, having children out of wedlock with many different men is such a bad thing, what happened in that time that caused her to seemingly 15 years later have no bother about any of it? So because of this, as a result, for me, this novel reads like a museum piece where we get a look over there. There's a fireplace where you can make goat stew and also dry your clothes when they're wet from the rain. Look, over there, there's the figure of a strong man out in the cotton field. Look, there's a preacher spewing hellfire and damnation to his congregants. Look, there's a pregnant woman with a gaggle of children around her. It seems somewhat empty and somewhat sterile, even despite the many, many children she's having. And there is a crisis at the end of the book that leads to a feeling of conclusion, but because everything that came before it is glossed over, I felt emotionally incomplete, and it falls far short for me as a novel. If you have read the book, or you do intend to read it in the future, please let me know if you think I'm wrong, because so far I'm not convinced. I don't think this really worked. So you might wonder what kept me reading or what stopped me reading. Even though it's a somewhat short novel, this is only slightly over 300 pages long, it took me longer to read than most novels. Not because I wanted to put it down, but I never wanted to rush back to it, and I never thought about it when I was away from it. And while I did never want to actually stop reading it, because I have this series that I'm doing, number one, but I could see that this is the type of book that one sets down and then is suddenly distracted by something else and then forgets to ever pick up again. I could see that being this type of a novel. So, do I recommend it? Sure. Reading is good for you. I recommend it sort of like I recommend going to the gym to stay healthy. It's not for everyone, though. It's interesting in an atmospheric sort of way, and it's excellent at the descriptions of some things, but it failed as fiction for me. What were my qualms? Well, I've discussed the main qualm, which is that I felt there was no real compelling story to go along with all these wonderful descriptions. My biggest qualm is the dialogue. A lot of the speech is is written in dialect, which I have seen some people praise as some sort of ethnographic feat to preserve the language of these people, the Gullah people they're called. But I found it distracting and off-putting. And I began to wonder, I should have looked this up before the video, but I began to wonder if Faulkner and Twain do the same thing when they're rendering Southern dialects, if they make it so overbearingly obvious that these people are speaking in a different way from people outside of that community would speak. If so, it didn't bother me when they did it, but it did bother me here. There's one instance where one character is speaking to another and addresses them as Kun, C-U-N, and in parentheses is written the word cousin. So it's dialogue, but then there's an explanatory parenthetical comment saying this is what it actually means. And if you have to put a parenthetical commentary in your own book about the dialogue, then something's not working, and maybe you shouldn't do it to begin with. So there is definitely wonder in Scarlet Sister Mary. And sometimes it is described beautifully, but I do wish Peterkin had paid more attention to the complicated shiftings of wonder within the character Mary, on her inner struggles and her growth as a woman and as a character. She doesn't seem to change at all throughout the book, and it's not necessary that characters need to change, but there has to be some kind of sense of fulfillment or diminution in either the character or the situation where we feel like we've been through something other than just having walked through a museum that has been prettily described to us. And yes, I do know that I go on about this whole thing about wonder being in the world. And when I do that, I'm not just talking about the kind of wonder that you could perceive with the five senses, although that's where it starts. But the wonder I'm talking about is a penetration into something mysterious, something fulfilling, in a way that we may not fully understand or even be able to articulate, that starts with the senses, but it courses through us and allows us to expand and to connect with the world in a more attentive and sympathetic way. That's the kind of wonder that I'm talking about, and that's the kind of wonder that I find a little bit missing in Scarlet Sister Mary. So, read it or don't read it, let me know or don't let me know if you agree or disagree. Meanwhile, find the wonder that is in your world today, because it is there and it is waiting for you. And please give it the attention that it deserves. Until we meet again, I am Tootight Lautrec. Mwah.